Welcome as you're signing on, making sure that your audio works. If you're willing, if you're already on, if you'll type in the chat box for me that you can hear me, I would love that. You just open up the little chat box. All right, thank you, Lynn, Sheila, Ania, Jen, Kirsty, Kelsey. Good. Good. At least 34 of you can hear me. Thank you. Even Andrea, thank you. All right, we'll begin here. Good, and we already got chat box working, so we're gonna have a good time. All right. All right, my friends, hello. I'm Samantha Moe. I'm so excited you're here for this webinar, Beneath Your Child's Behaviors. Whew, I think what's happening right now with COVID-19, it is especially important to understand what is causing your kids to act out, especially when we're spending so much extra time at home with them. If you're here because you have a strong-willed or intense kid, and you might not know what that means yet, but you will by the end of this hour with us here together, you're going to get some really, really great tips that are effective for calming some of these upsets and these outbursts that may have been a pattern before, or they might be entirely new to you. So with that, I'm excited to dive in, because what we're going to do today is, I think we have to acknowledge the fact that we are all learning to navigate this extra time with children. And this whole like distance learning thing, and this whole how do we clean our groceries when we're bringing them from the outside to the inside, not to mention the emotional stress that we're experiencing just from navigating regular life, whether that's how do you keep your house organized when you used to have a day to do it when kids were out of the house, or navigating your digital work position, or getting the bills paid, or making sure your loved ones are really well taken care of. I just want to say thank you for being here, because what we're going to talk about today in your parent-child relationship is not just like how do we survive, because this isn't like a week or two. We've already been doing it for that long, minimum, some of us 3 weeks or longer. This is about navigating the time together and using it well, so that on the other side of it, we start feeling these, this connection in this relationship that might have been buried at a deeper level, and we just now have the time to start working on it. So we're going to understand where your children's emotions and reactions are coming from. If you have a child who has this pleasing temperament where they do things just because they don't want to make mom or dad upset, that's probably not what you're here for. You probably have the kid where you're like, all right, how do I stop my kid from behaving the way that they do? And I just want to acknowledge that one of my clients, so I'm a certified parent coach, and one of my clients is a police officer. And we were talking about how antsy everybody is right now. And she said they've had an uptick in the number of stolen cars. And I was asking, well, why would that be? And she said, well, mostly it's teenagers who are bored and looking for something to do. So obviously that's a really extreme example, but yours probably isn't that extreme. But I think that acknowledging that kids are antsy and rowdy and we're antsy, we just need to know that we're in a different sort of energy in our whole world right now. And we know what's at stake, like financially what's at stake for us, emotionally, how are we connecting with our kids, how are our kids going to learn, what is this doing for their social skills. And you might already feel like you're pulling your hair out wondering, how am I going to do this for 2 more months? Or maybe more to the point, you might be thinking, how are we going to stay a loving family over this extended time period together? I oftentimes like to do this webinar right before summer to prepare you for the 3 months you're spending with your kids. And now we're looking at having that potentially more than doubled. So again, let's make this time count. But to give you just one more little teaser here, I was talking to a mom yesterday who was saying, you know, Samantha, the guidelines that you just walked me through, in a very short time, we have no blowups with my preschool child. She said those guidelines give us a good sense of how to operate in our family, and we're having way more fun together. So I'm going to teach you differently today. This isn't traditional parenting tactics. We're going to look on what's going on beneath the behaviors. And it kind of reminds me of what the CDC, like the way that they're talking about germs and staying healthy right now. They're talking about washing your hands, covering your sneezes, staying 6 feet away. But I think underlying that, all of us are wondering, yeah, but what else can we do? What else can we do? And so in parenting, the same thing is true. I'm going to give you some answers that aren't so obvious to help you create more peace and enjoyment so that this time spent in your family goes more smoothly for everyone, because we know it's all day long that you're together right now. So since we're quarantined for this next hour, you might need to know a little bit more about who I am. So let me share a little background information. I have a master's degree in communication disorders from the University of Minnesota that I obtained in 2004. And when I obtained that master's degree, I was 21 years old, and my anthem song was by John Lennon and the Beatles, "All You Need Is Love." So I remember walking across the stage to collect my diploma, and I had decided to work at a school for children with autism. And I thought, you know, this anthem is going to take me through my entire career. I know these kids with autism are challenging. I'm going to work at this school and learn how to navigate relationship with these kiddos ages 3 to 22 years old, because I have love, and that should be enough. You already know how that turned out because you're a parent. While I wish love was enough and it was that simple, it's not that simple. And so I remember this little boy named Charlie, who was 8 years old, who I needed to work on developing friendship skills between him and his peers with. And I would transition him out of the classroom. And every week when we were about 10 steps away from my speech therapy office, he would melt down. He'd fall to the floor, kick his feet, scream those hurtful things right in my face, looking up at me that you never want to hear your children saying. And I remember feeling a couple of ways. I remember feeling embarrassed because this happened every single week. I remember feeling judged because I peered over my shoulders and like the educators would be looking out their classroom doors. And I thought they were wondering, like, how is she going to navigate this situation again? And I felt defeated. And I remember looking down at Charlie as the sweat dripped down my back. And I thought, I have no idea what to do here. So that was pretty humbling. I ended up bribing Charlie and bringing him back to his classroom. But when I went to my office, I put my head in my hands. And at this very young age, I knew that if I couldn't get past the actual behaviors, if I couldn't find some tools, the love that I had wasn't going to be enough. So I started doing research in different areas like sensory integration and play therapy and emotional integration. And I learned a pattern that wasn't taught in the mainstream, and it wasn't even evident until I had studied for months and months and months. And what I came to understand was that if we want our children to connect with us in ways where they have self-control and it feels good for both of us, the brain needs to feel calm and the brain needs to feel safe. So as we're navigating distance learning and homeschooling and shelter in place, it's really important that we still have this conversation on how do we help kids, and you who are here today, thank you. How do we help you feel calm and safe? Because that's where positive connection and actual growth from the time that we spend together comes from. Now, many of you probably don't have a kid with autism. And the reason that my skills are so high is that, as you've probably heard, kids with autism can sometimes be considered the most challenging behaviorally, the most explosive, the hardest to figure out. And as I said, I started my journey with them at a very young age. And so in the last 16 years, what I've done is I have created a revolutionary brain and nervous system based approach, both to positive communication as well as parenting, that works to soothe and prevent the most challenging behaviors for intense children. So typically I teach my Mad to Glad blueprint online over an 8-week series, and I'll share how you can get some of that information later. But I feel like this topic that we have today is especially relevant because what I'm hearing on a daily basis as I'm doing one-on-one parent coaching is I'm hearing, I can't get anything done. I'm unproductive. My kid is so needy. And then just like as, moms and dads hang their heads, this is hard. And so I think you're probably in that boat, or there are moments where you've been in that boat. And so if you've been feeling consumed with those types of feelings, I want you to know that oftentimes the missing piece is understanding what's going on in your kid's brain beneath the behaviors. And from there, we have a whole new lens where we can do more than just survive, more than just navigate, but in fact, we can actually thrive. So today, we're going to cover these 4 things. We're going to cover the brain science at the root of behavior. We're going to talk about how to set up your day. I'm going to cover a few different scenarios from preschool through teen years so that you can navigate the day without outbursts. We're going to do something new today on this webinar. I'm going to do 5 minutes of spot coaching to teach one of you how to use one of the techniques we're talking about, how to put this into play. And by everybody listening in, it will actually give you a practical idea of what you can do with your child. And then at the very, very, very end, because I'd love to spend the whole hour with you, I'll share the #1 reason that the tactics that work with other kids don't work for emotionally intense kids. So with that, let's dive in. As we start with the brain science to understand what's happening with children's behavior, it's essential to know that the model that is floating around the field of child development comes from Dr. Daniel Siegel out of UCLA. He's a leading neuroscientist. And he talks about the brain as though there's a downstairs brain and an upstairs brain. So the downstairs brain is responsible for that fight, flight, or freeze response. And let me just pause here since you're on the chat box and engage you a little bit. What do you know about fight or flight? Type a couple of words in. I know sometimes the freeze takes people by surprise. They haven't heard about that. Jessica says stuck. Yeah, you get very stuck. Protective. A sympathetic response. Thank you, Sydney. That's right. Yeah, dysregulation, aggression, reptile brain. Yeah, Lynn says that trauma-informed care relates to it. Yes. Wonderful. It can show up as behavior that's like meanness, that's reactive, that's panic. Hi, everybody. Thank you for all those comments. So the downstairs brain is this early primitive operating system that is responsible for the olden days when we lived in teepees or caves and a bear was chasing us in the woods. This system would get activated and then we would fight, or I'm sorry, I guess that's like flight. We'd run away. We'd fight to keep ourselves alive, or we would freeze, like maybe play dead, so that we wouldn't cause any disturbance around us and we would stay alive. Now, this is tricky for so many reasons when we're talking about kids with challenging behaviors. #1, we're finding kids with intense behaviors are stuck in this downstairs brain, and so they're reacting to you as if you're the bear in the woods. And all you asked them to do was sit down to do their spelling words. The other reason this is challenging is because it's in direct opposition with the upstairs brain, which is what we adults, these are the goals we set for ourselves in parenting or for our children, where we're like, let's teach them how to solve problems on their own instead of, lashing out and hitting their sibling. Let's think of new ways to solve that problem. Or really common right now, right? Like, hey, pay attention when I'm trying to teach you or talk to you. Or you think of the little kid, right? You take them by the chin. Did you hear what I said? It's also responsible for their own sense of behavioral management. So when we're talking about how do you help kids develop social emotional skills and get regulated, we're talking about two different sides of the brain here. Like social emotional skills and control is upstairs brain, and downstairs brain is that regulation. And when that downstairs brain is activated, adrenaline and cortisol flood the brain and the entire body for hours. I can never remember this number. It's more than 12 hours. It depends if it's adrenaline or cortisol. But it's like when that instance happens, it's like a punch in the brain that floods the system, and it's revved up for 12 to 24 hours. And so that's why it's so easy to keep on triggering children or parents alike. So I call this fire in the brain. And the reason is that we have a natural tendency to want to use our skills as an adult to help kids become calmer or pay attention to their homework. But the problem is, if you don't know how to calm the fire in the brain first, your efforts take a lot of energy and don't usually result in long-lasting rewards. In fact, depending on how you're trying to calm the fire, it can actually create a sense of retaliation in your child so that they want to get back at you. So this is really important for homeschooling, right? Because part of the job that you're taking on is helping set your child up for success. But if they have this like punchy reactive response to you, or they run away, then I want you to know how to engage them so that you feel confident that you know how to navigate this everyday situation instead of waking up feeling like you're dreading the day. So in case it's not really clear to you already whether or not you have an intense brain child, here are some signals. Your kid likes to be in control. They like to rule the roost. They'll do things as long as it was their idea in the first place. Oftentimes the triggers are confusing. We see this a lot in the sensory world and the trauma world. So the tag on the back of the shirt is an obvious example. The seam on the toe of the sock, flushing the toilet, that kind of sound can be really bothersome. You ate the last banana, and for whatever reason, that triggers your child. And the reaction that they have is way too high for the low significance of the situation. And you know when your kid's up here, if you match them, you know what happens, right? They get worse. So traditional parenting doesn't work with intense brain kids because it doesn't include the principles of brain science and how to actually calm the fire in the brain. And what occurs is that the more that a child is used to this wiring, I often hear parents say, my kid was intense from the day they were born. It was a week ago or so that a parent said to me, yeah, you know, the nurses told me we can calm all the other babies, but we can't calm your baby in the hospital nursery. We just see this intensity shining through children's eyes, sometimes from that newborn stage. And then other times it becomes more evident after their toddler years. We start noticing like, you know, how come my kid is always testing me? They always want to get their way. They've become very rigid and they won't listen to me. They won't put their jacket on, even if it's cold and they want to go outside. Like they just always want to win. And that is a function of the little scientist in the brain that truly is like a gambler with their hand on a slot machine testing, will I win this time? How about this time? And what you already know about this is that there are moments where you stay calm and you don't give in, and your kid will go in at different angles, won't they? Yeah. And so you know not to yell, but then you might be standing there like, but what should I do instead? So the first thing that I want to teach you is that this mantra, calm body, calm voice, calm face. So the first thing to do is to calm yourself. Now this might sound a little bit simple. And if so, I'm glad, because I want it to be simple. We have way too much complexity happening right now. And this is so foundational to actually shifting your child's brain wiring that calm body, calm voice, calm face is meant to be something that you can just repeat to yourself. So take a screenshot of this if you want to remember it and put it as a screensaver on your computer. It's important because a child who is in that downstairs brain, they're hyper vigilant. So hyper vigilant is where, like if I leave, I'm 15 minutes from the Mall of America. So if I were to leave there, if it was actually open at 10 o'clock at night, alone in high heels, walking out to my car, and I heard heavy footsteps behind me, my hair on the back of my neck would stand up. That's what hypervigilance is. I suddenly know how far away that person is, the size that they are. I can hear things like breathing and if they're holding something in their hand. So what we're seeing is that protective mechanism is on around the clock for our strong-willed to intense children. So you can use that calm mantra to your advantage because of one more brain science piece that I'll geek out on, and then we'll move forward. And that is mirror neurons. So mirror neurons are just like they sound, like there's a mirror that reflects the state another person is in, right? So pre-coronavirus, I loved using the example of when a baby would be sitting in their high chair, and if you would take a bite of your food, your baby, you know what she would do with her mouth, right? She would open her mouth too. So this is an example of mirror neurons reflecting your state, even though it wasn't intentional. I see this now when I go walking in the woods across the street from my place in St. Paul, Minnesota here, where there are some people who are smiling down the path, and one goes to one side of the path, the other steps off the path to keep that social distance. And if somebody's smiling, we tend to smile back, or if somebody says hello, we say hello back, versus there's other people who you can tell are in this fear mode and protective bubble, and they're out getting their exercise, but they scowl, or they don't want to make eye contact, or they grunt when you say hello to them. And instantly that feels really different, doesn't it? It's like, ooh, I don't feel happy right now. And there's no judgment there. I think that's just an example of mirror neurons. The state that you're in reflects the state that others will pick up on. So we want to understand mirror neurons because the way that you respond to your child will make a really huge difference in how well they're going to sit down and do their distance learning. It's going to impact if they'll take quiet time. It's certainly going to affect when you have older kids and teenagers and you want to talk about their day, if you've been grumpy or bossing or kind of rough around the edges all day, it's going to impact if they open up to you or not. So we want to always consider our own personal state first. So if you have questions on this concept or comments, please post them in the chat, and as you are, I will set up what we're going to talk about next. And that is, while staying calm is foundational from a brain perspective, it's never quite enough. So have you ever had that experience where you're like, well, I'm calm until, and I'll flash a picture here of kids doing homeschooling. Like, are you calm until you've said it 5 times? Are you calm until they've gotten up out of bed and woken you up 6 nights in a row? Are you calm until they say something nasty to you and that's when you really trigger? So I want to acknowledge that, because it's one thing to stay calm, but if we don't have the plan for how to set up the day and do positive discipline and connect emotionally and a few other pillars that are part of my 8-week training series, calm isn't enough. Like, most families need a combination of 3 to 5 core practices in order for the day to unfold smoothly. So I just want to acknowledge you in that, since you've probably been hearing, the importance of calm since your kid was born, since before they were born. All right, so I don't see any comments in the chat box, so I'll continue moving into how to set up your day. So, setting up your day right now there is an important structural piece. Of course there is. It entirely matters. That's why teachers are sending home the general schedule that they have had children on in their classroom, so there can in some ways be some congruency. But setting up your day from the brain perspective is really about setting up your relationship so that you can navigate the day or your schedule without an argument. So I'll talk about some guidelines in a bit, but you know what has to come first? That your kid feels connected to you. It's not just about the achievement or the accomplishment of the day. It's about them feeling connected to you, the person that they love and feel safe with. So if you've ever had, have you ever had a day that looked great on paper? That like you've already mapped out some good schedules, but then it goes wrong and by 11 a.m. you guys are completely burnt out and you're like, I give up. We're going to try again tomorrow. Or you've ended up in tears. I train professionals to become certified parent coaches in the Mad to Glad approach. And I have been so grateful to hear from those who are Montessori teachers and daycare, like directors and owners of clinics. Monday this week, they were like, I yelled at my kid and they ended up in tears. So please know that you're not alone in that. And there's no judgment, but it's also a sign that something that looks good on paper doesn't mean that we've set up the relationship in a way that would feel really good for everybody. And so that's when we end up disheartened. You might feel discouraged and certainly wondering, how am I going to do this for 2 more months before summertime hits? So my point is, it's not just about having a perfect schedule, even though one of the pillars of the blueprint dedicates an entire class to this, like what are the right schedules to have on a daily basis. So let's go into the importance of understanding how to connect with your kid. So for this, we need to come back to the brain science and recognize that there is a right side of the brain that is responsible for emotions and the left side of the brain that is responsible for logic and language. So what's interesting is homeschooling is pretty logical. It's pretty left-brained, right? There's a lot of language happening. But the experience of homeschooling is very emotional. And when your kid is often getting stuck just due to the fact that their brains aren't fully developed, they're getting stuck in their emotional part of their brain when you're trying to guide them through a logical task. So I'm going to ask you a question. Do you know how old we are when our brains are fully developed? Type that in the chat box. Couple of 25s coming through. 25 question mark. Yeah, good. Yeah, all of you got it. 25 plus. So they used to say 25. And then there's studies a few years ago when I looked again, it said 26 to 28. And then through word of mouth, they were like, it could be up to 30. This is neurotypical human beings that we're talking about here. So your precocious 6-year-old who should know better than to rip their paper in half and stomp across the room, maybe, I mean, in a way they know better, but their emotional control system, it's not developed and it's really far away from being developed. The 17-year-old who gets really upset and curses up a storm and, leaves the house, same thing, where they understand better. They've been learning for almost 2 decades of their lives under your guidance, but the emotional brain still takes over. And, let me not stop there. Let me move forward into adults. How many times this week alone have you been emotionally triggered and you're like, I know better, but you don't know what to do instead? So the emotional brain is a really powerful system, just like the downstairs fight or flight stress response. So the key is learning, instead of how to stay in your logical brain, how can you actually move into the emotional brain so your child feels a sense of connection and they can relate to you, and then that actually allows them to get back into logic and home study. So let me share a practical example of this. There was a family I worked with, and mom had an 11-year-old boy and a 9-year-old girl. And she came to me saying, Devin is just an angry kid. He's 11 years old. He always punches holes in the wall. And we've tried everything we could think of: individual therapy, family therapy, alternative therapy. He's just an angry kid. She said, the other day I made a special celebration dinner because it was my daughter's last day of school. And so when the kids were done, when I got done cooking, she said it took me quite a while. It was about 45 minutes because Devin is gluten-free and dairy-free. So I made it all from scratch. And when it was ready, I called the kids into the kitchen, and Devin came, or excuse me, his sister Abby came running, and Devin's nowhere to be found. So I went into the living room and I said, Devin, come and eat. Your sister is ready. And he crossed his arms over his chest and he looked at her and said, I don't want to eat that. I want to order pizza. Oh, Devin, we're not ordering pizza. I know you like this meal. It took me 45 minutes to make. Come on, let's go. She said, I made the mistake of reaching down to grab his arm, and things escalated from there. He grabbed the remote control, he tossed it across the room, and it put a huge dent in the wall. And as we always do in parent coaching, I said, well, what was your response? What did you do or say next? And mom said, well, I told him, Devin, you know that we're having an open house this weekend and we're going to have like 50 people coming into the house. There can't be a dent in the wall. So you're going to have to use your allowance money to pay for somebody to come in and fix it. You hear the logic and language in this scenario? Let me go back a step. So I started working with mom on the strategy that I'm teaching you today, which is understanding the emotion underneath all of this. And I asked for more context. What else is happening in Devin's life? She said, well, we're moving house in 60 days. And so we gave the kids a choice to finish out the school year where they're at or move to the new school early. Abby decided to move to the new school early, which is why we were having a celebration dinner. Devin decided to stay. She said, Devin struggles in school. He gets sent to the principal's office frequently for acting out. He's the class clown. He's never invited to birthday parties. And he has to leave his classroom to get reading help because of his learning disability. So the long story short, what mom said to me next really made my heart ache. She said, the high point of Devin's day for the last 2 years has been riding the school bus home with his sister, who was about to go to a different school. So when you hear that story, get your typing fingers ready. What are some of the emotions Devin's probably experiencing in his life in that moment? Sadness and grief, yeah, and loss, anxiety, frustration, fear of unknown, disappointment, abandonment. Yeah, all of those, all or any of those things, right? So we start getting a sense of how Devin could be feeling. He could feel betrayed. He could, thank you. Yeah, that's right, Sheila. He could feel left behind or rejected, Juliet. So there's all these different things he could be feeling. I mean, maybe it's even that he's left without a friend in the world. So as tough as it is to begin to see a young kid, a young person, when we look deeper, it gives us a new set of strategies to positively relate with kids like Devin. So it's important to help you see how your kid might be feeling right now with COVID-19 and all of the, I don't know how exposed they are to the news and how protected they are. But a lot of this stuff and the distance learning, if it's hard for your kid, it can really cause them to act out. So when you understand this emotional part of the brain, you now are tuned into something that they say in the brain field, which is when you connect a child to their emotions, it connects them to you. One more time. When you connect a child to their emotions, it connects them to you. So think of an emotional situation in your family right now and type. Like how, just get right to the point. Think of something that happened this week. Underneath the outburst, how was your kid feeling? And why do you think the outburst happened? What is your kid feeling right now? Because a lot of times it looks like it's, I don't want to do the homework. But it might be like Sheila's saying, they miss their friends. Yeah, you're furloughed from your job or your kid. Yeah, they feel uncertain, unsettled. Look at all these words. Insecurity. Yeah, your kid feels, I mean, shoot, I'm 37 years old. I feel pretty insecure. And then there's the sibling rivalry. So one kid might get angry because you're not paying attention to them and they hurt their sibling. Isolated, overwhelmed, stressed. Yeah, I mean, the academic stress can even feel high right now. Now, somebody typed something a little bit different. Smothered. Thank you, Sheila. Yeah, your kid could totally feel smothered, right? I mean, if you could raise your hand right now, I mean, how many of you feel smothered? I think I woke up a week ago. A week ago. My sister called me. And it was evening time and she's like, how are you doing? And I'm like, stifled. I don't even know. Like, I just feel stifled right now. And so when we have especially this temperament where we like to have variety and we like things to go our way and we like control, it creates this fight response or this lethargy, this like, I'm going to flee or freeze response from the world because things don't feel good right now. Yeah, and there's a lot of other good things here. So thank you. Yeah, if you're in the healthcare profession, like I know Lisa is, they might feel scared. Like, who's going to watch us when our parents are at work? Or they might feel rushed. Interesting, huh? With all this homeschooling time, you're still working to keep people healthy. And so there still could be a feeling of rushing. And I think that speaks to a lot of parents. There could be a feeling of rushing because you all, not you all, but a lot of you can probably relate to the sense of you're trying to get your own stuff done. So we have these feelings as well. So as mentioned before, right, I'm going to get to structure in a bit, I promise, because structure is important. But underneath, what is more important is acknowledging emotion. So we're going to use this strategy to do spot coaching. So the way that you can volunteer for spot coaching, I think, let me pull up my chat box here. The way you can volunteer for spot coaching is you can raise your hand. So if you're on the computer, I think there's a way that you can raise your hand. You just like click the raise your hand button, but don't do it yet because I want to tell you a couple guidelines. I would like for you to volunteer if you have a kid ages like between 3 and 13. And for an emotional situation that I'm going to coach you around, that's kind of middle of the road. I know there's a lot of volatile, explosive stuff, but we have so many people on the call right now that I want it to be a little bit more applicable to a lot of families. And I'll give you an example of how you can take this strategy to apply to your family. So if that's like, you know, a benefit for you volunteering, and I'll just unmute you. So you'll need to have a quietish background. This is one of the things we do in our 8-week training online. So what I promise you is that even as a listener, you're going to get something practical from this example. And then we'll talk about scheduling guidelines. So with all of those little guidelines, please raise your hand if you would be willing to share the emotional situation your kid just went through. And we'll talk to you. Galaxy Tab A, you were number 1, my friend. So I'm going to allow you to talk. I'm going to hit this button. I don't know your real name, but your computer's name is Galaxy Tab A. Can you?
Sorry, Kelly.
Kelly?
Yep.
Hi, Kelly. Do you and I know each other?
No, but I do go to Dr. Jamie's, so.
Oh, excellent. Another chiropractor.
Yeah.
Thank you. So my husband is a chiropractor as well.
Oh,
so thank you for volunteering, Kelly.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. So we'll just spend about 5 minutes doing this. Give us a little information. Like who's in your family? Are there one parent or two? What are the ages of your kids and any special needs?
Yeah, so it's myself and my husband and our 5-year-old daughter with Down syndrome and our 2-year-old gifted neurotypical child.
Uh-huh. And you said 2-year-old.
Yes, she just turned 2.5.
Uh-huh. Gifted neurotypical. Is she the little one we hear right now?
Yes.
All right. And you said your 5-year-old has Downs.
Yes.
All right. And then gender and names of your children, just first names, if you will, please.
Both female, and Madeline and Jane.
Okay. And Madeline is what age?
5, the 5-year-old.
And your 2-year-old's name is?
Josie.
Josie. Sorry, I had missed that. Okay.
No, that's okay.
Okay, great. So tell us what the emotional situation was. Just get like in a couple of sentences.
Yeah, so one example is we were on a video chat with her teacher just the other day to kind of check in, her special ed teacher, and kind of talk about how we had a lot of explosive anger. So, and then as we were in the conversation, 10, 15 minutes, both of the girls were around me and they had been playing. They came back down and Madeline decided that she didn't like how things were going, and she started just swatting at her sister, kicking, and I had to restrain them both from each other because Josie wouldn't leave and Madeline wouldn't stop kicking and hitting and like just lunging herself at her.
Ah, got it. Okay, so the explosive anger that you were talking to the special ed teacher was around Madeline.
Yes.
Your 5-year-old, but then in the midst of that conversation, your 2.5-year-old Josie came in. And who initiated the swatting and kicking?
Madeline, the 5-year-old.
Madeline. So we're still talking about Madeline. Got it.
Yeah,
okay.
She's the one that we have the most emotionally charged. and that's her. And she has great receptive language, getting better expressive language.
Great. I understand that as a speech therapist. So she understands really well and she's still practicing getting her words out.
Correct.
Okay. Thank you very much. So tell us how you responded to that situation.
I asked her to please stop and to sit next to me. A lot of times with her, it's like we're not even saying anything. I usually try to say, I understand that you're feeling frustrated, but we don't hit, we don't hurt. And actually ended up taking her speech there, or her teacher as a distraction to get her to stop swinging.
Got it. Okay, good example. So there's a few things that you've already said that in a 5-minute spot coaching session, I want to acknowledge for you, because everybody who's listening can hear this good stuff that you're doing already. So you asked her to stop, you had her sit next to you, so you were trying to like re-engage her or distract her, and you even said, I understand. You said, I understand to her in some way, right?
Right.
So all of those things seem like the right thing to do. And and they are in moments. I did hear one thing that you said that's a trigger word. And the trigger word is but. I understand, but we don't hit and hurt. So the way that so I'm going to have to create a little bit of proactive context for you, because the way that this strategy of acknowledging Madeline's emotion is going to be effective for you is making sure that the behaviors that you want to see stop, they have to be they don't have to be, but I suggest this. They need to be concrete and on a visual poster, and they need to start with the word no. So things like no hitting, no hurting. Now, this is not often a strategy that parents are taught, because there's a big movement towards positive behavioral intervention. And so oftentimes we're trying to be kind and we teach things to kids, like I just said, like be kind, be nice, keep your hands to yourself, keep a safe body. But for kids who have more intense emotional needs, they need it to be black and white so that it's concrete, and so that you and your parenting know when this behavioral rule is broken, that we've created a poster around and role played, like what happens next. We move into something I'm not talking about today, but I'll just kind of highlight it. It's then we move into the positive discipline of what actually works.
Sure.
So I appreciate your scenario, because it actually highlights a complex scenario where in that moment you can acknowledge, I see you're upset, but she's going to need an entire proactive system that includes behavioral rules, practicing around it as a family, and then practicing a positive discipline result. So so is there anything in there that has been valuable for you where you're like, I haven't looked at that piece quite yet?
Yeah, I guess we get the rules, but I don't think we've really practiced going through the scenarios, and it's all been in the moment for the most part.
Yeah, and I get it, because in the moment, what you said of please stop, I think that's the number one, like, first thought that I hear in behavioral situations, like, how do I get this to stop? But with kids who have more of this intense brain chemistry, to create a map in their brain of how to behave differently, they need it proactively, because otherwise in the moment, the downstairs brain is already active.
Mm-hmm.
So the please stop kicking, I understand, all of those things are higher brain levels than fight or flight, and they won't sink in.
Makes sense.
Okay, cool. Thank you so much for volunteering, Kelly.
Thank you.
Yeah, hope to talk to you again.
Yes.
Bye. All right. So for everybody who listened just now, what was valuable about that for you? What kind of takeaway just from that little 5-minute spot coaching session can you apply to your family or refresh your approach in these times? Yeah, the but phrase, exactly. It's from Jessica. So oftentimes it's important to say, like, yes, you're mad. Yep, I see you're frustrated. And we're doing this instead, so that we're not triggering that. Proactively explaining house rules and expectations with scenarios. So it's so fascinating that if we think about how we're helping kids develop academic skills right now, we're doing it in a way that's repetitive and that's really structured. And the same thing is true for really intense emotions, is that we can teach them like emotional coping in a way that's proactive and structured. And for intense brain kids, it's entirely necessary. So when you hear this, you might be like, oh, well, I get why I've tried a million things, or I've read all these books or worked with therapists and it hasn't been working, because we need to customize it for your kid's brain chemistry and get the actual implementation in order to see changes. So I'll come back to some of these questions if we have time later. I want to make sure that we also cover some of the schedule stuff, and then the last tip of the number one reason traditional parenting tactics don't work. So thank you everybody for all of your participation and helping Kelly feel supported by leaving comments in the chat box. So as far as, so we've talked about calm, we've talked about connection, we even got a little bonus there talking about rules and positive discipline as general concepts. So when we're gonna, when we look at schedule, let's look at a few different ages as guidelines, because these will definitely make your days unfold more smoothly. So if you're looking at the screen here, you can see that for preschoolers, and again, I actually tapped into the 40 plus coaches who are Mad to Glad certified parent coaches, and they're Montessori teachers and childcare directors, and they have all this social workers, all these skills. And here's the consensus. They're like, okay, so for preschoolers, right now it's about more play and less teaching. If you're working from home and you're like, oh, how do you play all day long? It is helpful to maybe set up chunks where at certain times of day you have your craft activity versus your outdoor time versus your reading, your snuggling, your quiet time, your music time. If you need a little bit more structure, those are some good ideas. And again, I invite you to take a screenshot of this. For your school age kids, it's really helpful to organize the physical space. Frustration comes when they're interrupting you because they can't find their colored pencil, or they can't find the pencil sharpener, or they can't find paper. So you organize the physical space by getting that organized the night before and making sure their technology is charged and their headphone cords are untangled. That is a really good one as well. Also think of outside the box ways of doing academics. That's the beauty of doing stuff at home at times. And so maybe they can practice basic math by bouncing the basketball or shooting hoops. Maybe they can practice their spelling words using sidewalk chalk. Always remember to praise their accomplishments, because that's what the really good teachers are doing. They're sticking with the positive and not just focusing on like the task that has to be done. And offer them contact, like make eye contact with them, like be really present with them in the moments that you can, and put a hand on their shoulder when they're doing something that's hard for them to let them know you're there. Do projects together. So some of those things you would do naturally with their homework after school hours, when you're doing some distance learning, do those during the daytime. And then for teenagers, be that sounding board for them to review things. Can you be present morning, middle of the day, or before they go to bed, and just, ask them, how are things going? What support can I offer? What ways can I help? And some teenagers are going to grunt and shrug you off. So maybe you support them by offering to make breakfast or lunch, right? It's so easy to get into this rhythm where we're like, oh, they can do their own thing, but they still need that care and that support and that emotional connection from you. One of my clients is really good at pointing out what their teenager does have control over. So she was saying, like, isn't it cool that you get to chew your gum while you're doing distance learning? And she asked him for ideas, and he's like, yeah, and I can have my water bottle at right next to my computer. Usually I can take bathroom breaks whenever I want. So pointing out some of those areas that they do have control, and same, like praise their accomplishments, because the teenagers are often doing more on their own. And so recognizing and noticing their effort is really helpful. So, and I'm just going to pause for 1 second because I saw a Q&A come in the chat box, and I'm navigating this on my own. So I'm trying to see if I can open it really quickly. Not quick enough, I can't find it. So hopefully these guidelines are something you can take something away from. And I just want to again acknowledge that given everything we've talked about today, you may be like, whew, it's kind of a lot of stuff. Like calm and connection sound simple, but there's specific action steps to actually shift your behavior, and like, how do you actually implement this? And that's what my 8-week training series is all about.